Jan Vishwas Bill, which was passed in the monsoon session of the Parliament last week, has resulted in a debate, in a controversy. While the bill aims to boost ease of living and ease of doing business by decriminalizing 42 central acts, there are concerns arising from a provision of a compromise clause in the bill. Now, the Jan Vishwas Bill amends a specific section of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940 that covers a certain category of misbranded medicines. The bill passed yesterday, making Section 27D of the drug law compoundable. Now, what are compoundable offences? Compoundable offences are those that can be compromised, whereas non-compoundable offences are more serious offences in which parties cannot compromise and they involve jail term. Now, these are some of the legitimate concerns that the change will allow drug makers to get off lightly on serious charges of making substandard medicines. The government is refuting those claims. We will of course have to understand what these concerns are around Jan Vishwas Bill and how do they tinker with existing Drugs and Cosmetics Act. To talk about that, joining us on the show is T. Prashant Reddy, who's a senior lawyer. Mr. Reddy, thanks very much for taking time out. I want to begin by asking, what are these amendments to the Drug and Cosmetic Act that are concerning to you?
Well, the main problem is that it allows for the compounding of certain offenses, such as the prosecution of manufacturers of not of standard quality medicine. So earlier, the manufacturers of these NSQ drugs could be, the law allows for them to be punished between 1 year to 2 years, along with a fine of rupees 20,000. So what the Jan Vishwas Bill does is it makes it compoundable on the payment of a fine of rupees 5 lakhs, which basically means that if the manufacturer is ready to cough up 5 lakhs, the case will not go to trial and he will not be required to spend any jail time for a conviction.
So that literally.
All right. Are you trying to say, therefore, that the law is tilted in favor of manufacturers?
Yes, definitely. The legislation is tilted in favor of the manufacturers. In fact, the pharmaceutical industry has been asking for such a remedy for several years now. And last year, we saw a version of this in a different bill that the government had published seeking comments. Basically, a new law to replace the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, and that almost a similar provision has worked its way into the Jan Vishwas Bill. So this provision is there in the law because the pharmaceutical industry wanted it to be in the law.
All right, and what are the implications for consumers? We understand you're saying that this is going to make very serious offences less punishable, compoundable, essentially meaning that there will be no jail term. But what are the implications for consumers?
Well, the risk basically is that without any serious penalties under the law, the fear is that pharmaceutical manufacturers will weaken their quality controls and not spend enough, give quality control enough attention. The government, for its part, has been trying to explain this amendment by claiming that NSQ drugs, that is not of standard quality drugs, are not a serious issue from a public health perspective. But that's simply not true, because a lot of NSQ drugs, for example, if a drug does not have enough of an antibiotic, if it's an antibiotic and the drug doesn't have enough active ingredient, it won't cure an infection. If it's a blood thinner, and it doesn't have enough active ingredient, it won't have the required effect, to thin your blood. So a lot of these defects, which are classified as NSQ, are actually very serious. So they have serious health consequences. So if these are not punished seriously enough under the law, if there isn't enough of a legal deterrent, there is no reason for the pharma industry to take the law seriously.
Okay, but the government says, sir, that NSQ or non-standard quality drugs will do little harm. They're not going to kill you, they're not going to heal you. So what's the problem?
Yeah, that's what the government is trying to say, but that's completely incorrect. So if I can just explain for a minute, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act has four category of offenses for drugs. So one is adulterated drugs. So these are drugs, for example, where some foreign substance has been added, like the cough syrup cases, which, where the cough syrup was adulterated with DEG. Then there are spurious drugs, which are counterfeit drugs. The third category is misbranded drugs. The fourth category is NSQ drugs. Now, in India, traditionally, adulterated and spurious drugs have been punished much more severely because that's something, which is easily understandable by the political class and the bureaucratic class. The popular conception of bad medicine is adulterated or spurious medicine. But the biggest problem in India is the fourth category, which is NSQ drugs. This is when a drug fails to meet the quality standards specified in the law. So, and these quality defects can be of many different types. The drug may not have enough of an active ingredient. The drug may not dissolve in the body fast enough. The drug may be unstable, and which has other problems for in the manner in which it dissolves, etc. So basically, NSQ drugs will not kill by themselves. Like, for example, an adulterated drug will end up killing you because it's adulterated. But an NSQ drug can end up killing you because of its failure to treat the underlying disease in the body, right? So, for example, if you have, like I said, if you have a life threatening infection, you take an antibiotic which has only 30% of the active ingredient that is mentioned on the labeling. Like, for example, you need 100 grams of an antibiotic and there's only 30 milligrams in the tablet that you have taken, and you have a life threatening infection. Chances are that you may die. So there are a lot of different categories of medication where a treatment failure can have serious health consequences. So the government is completely misleading everybody when they say that NSQ drugs are not a serious issue.
All right. So the problem I essentially understand is with Section 27D of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which makes and prescribes, in fact, a punishment of 2 years and a fine of 20,000 rupees in case a drug is substandard. Now, that is going to be tweaked. The Jan Vishwas Bill will make the punishment compoundable, which means that you could escape jail term by paying as much as 5 lakh rupees. From what I'm reading, it's more like a slap on the wrist for people who end up making drugs that are adulterated, perhaps not in line with prescriptions.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It's a slap on the wrist. And what's also important for your viewers to understand is that even Section 27D in its current form is rarely ever enforced strictly. So, for example, despite the law saying minimum imprisonment of 1 year in jail, we have seen a number of judgments from criminal courts in India where the judge has refused to send the manufacturer to jail. Instead, they sentence them to simple imprisonment till the rising of the court, which means the moment the judge gets up from the bench, they are free to go, and a fine of some rupees 20,000. So the existing law was first of all not enforced strictly enough, and this particular amendment is like basically a slap on the wrists.
Okay.
I mean, ideally, the government should withdraw this bill from Parliament, or at least withdraw this one particular provision in the bill.
All right. And the government's intent, of course, is to make it easy for businesses, to ensure that there are less number of businesses which are punishable. How do you reconcile with the intent? Intent, of course, was not to harm consumers, people at large, or to let pharma companies have it easy. The intent was to make it easy for these companies to operate in India.
I mean, but that's the problem, right? I mean, to what extent are you ready to allow business to operate easily in India? There has to be some kind of punishment. Making business easy does not mean throwing the entire law out. So ideally, the government should have had some kind of framework in place to decide what kind of offenses would be decriminalized. In an ideal world, any kind of act which causes harm to other citizens, either mortal bodily harm or financial
Right.
harm, should be criminalized. That's always been
Absolutely.
the basis of our criminal law.
Absolutely, it should be criminalized, because let's not forget, Krishna, we were talking about drugs and pharmaceutical industry. A lot of it operates on faith. India continues to be a leading exporter only on the basis of faith, despite the news of that killer cough syrup that has killed children in Gambia, Uzbekistan, the eye drop that Sri Lanka refuses to get from us, because that faith somewhere is dwindling in Indian pharmaceutical business, and we will of course have to work very hard in order to ensure compliance for pharmaceutical industries. Mr. Reddy, thanks very much, sir, for taking time out for explaining this very important story to us.